Great. So welcome everyone to Margaret's PhD defense. I'm Allison Okamura. Had the pleasure of being Margaret's PhD advisor. And as we were just discussing, it's amazing to see so many people at Margaret's defense, virtual defense here. I think one of the advantages of doing these things online is that people can join. I think we actually have also, in addition to family, friends, colleagues, current and future, we also have researchers from various parts of the world who have popped in, who are interested in hearing about Margaret's work. I'm going to start with a little introduction, as I like to do at these things. So give me a second to share my screen. And it might help if I put in slideshow mode. Okay. Are you all able to see this okay? Can I get a thumbs up from Margaret? Okay, great. So this is my introduction of Margaret Coad, who I've been lucky to have as a PhD student in my lab in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Stanford. I'm sure as many of you know, she did her bachelor's at MIT, did her master's and PhD here at Stanford, and her next step is to go on to be a faculty member at Notre Dame. So one of the ways in which I can oh, actually, I forgot about this. This is the old original picture of Margaret when she first joined my lab. She looks so young and still looks young, but with longer hair. So Margaret has changed slightly over the years. But you know, during her PhD, the contributions that I paid most attention to was not the length of her hair, but her research contributions and also her mentoring of other students. These are the papers that Margaret contributed to, and I think the main thing I want to point out to them, in addition to their volume, is how many contributions she's made that have not only been her own work and the work that you'll hear about in her thesis, but also helping other students in the lab and contributing to their projects. And in particular, training new students, both in the lab and those who went elsewhere. So just a few examples are Sadie and Rachel and Sangu, both domestic and international, are students that she's worked with who have also gone on to do other things. And I'm sure there's even more than this, Margaret, but these are the ones I picked out because they're co-authors on some of these papers. So we really thank Margaret for all these contributions, but I won't belabor that because you're going to get to hear more about it. Margaret has been an extremely important part of the lab since she joined about 6 years ago. And this sort of gives you a snapshot of how the lab has changed over time, of course, most recently to virtual lab meetings. And we've always enjoyed her spirit, and especially her sort of volunteerism in the lab has always been fantastic. She's always willing to mentor new students, help with what needs to be done. And she just really contributed to our lab culture in terms of it being friendly to newcomers and having students be supportive of each other. And she also does fun things like dress up as in Halloween. So I managed to get this one lab photo that came from Halloween where she's sporting a cow outfit, per being at Stanford on the farm. We've also had a lot of fun together outside of the lab. I think one of the things I'll always remember Margaret for is being so fearless in taking demos places. She has hauled her Vine robot, all over the place, including this photo on the left was actually to a conference in Hawaii where she won a Best Demonstration Award for her Vine robot. And there's our very happy program manager watching the Vine robot work. So Margaret has taken this to various locations, both in the Bay Area and on airplanes, and managed to get the TSA not to confiscate it. And I can't tell you how much Margaret has done for this whole area of research in our lab in terms of being able to publicize it and letting folks in the public get their hands on it. Margaret and I have also had a lot of fun traveling together to conferences. She's always up for an adventure. And so we've been on some great hikes and snorkeling trips and such in combination with going to conferences. And we've also had a number of fantastic times in lab retreats. And it's just always a joy to have Margaret's company and have her smiling face. And I'll just conclude again with saying how much we also appreciate her mentorship of other students in the lab. So, this is an example of Sadie Cutler, who went on to do a PhD at Cornell, and Margaret being her mentor by her poster. You can also see that Margaret has the greatest array of sports attire. I think of any of my students, I'm always asking her, where did you get that great Stanford tank top and that's Stanford t-shirt? Because she's always sporting her allegiance and because she plays sports. And so I'll be a little sad that she'll be switching that for probably Notre Dame gear very soon. But we've so appreciated your company, Margaret, and I'm excited to have you tell everyone about your thesis research now. So I will stop sharing and pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Allison. Let me just take a minute and share my screen. Okay, I think it's good, right?
Looks great.
Okay. Thank you so much, Allison, for that amazing introduction. It's so great to see all of you here, and I'll say more about that in the acknowledgements at the end. But I'm really excited to tell you today about my PhD research on a new type of robot that moves through its environment by growing like a plant. Here's a quick preview of the types of robots that I'm going to be talking about today. And the title of my thesis is Design, Modeling, and Control of Vine Robots for Exploration of Unknown Environments. In the talk today, I'm going to start by giving an introduction about what vine robots are and what they're good at. Then I will talk about how I brought a vine robot system out into the field to explore an archeological site. Then I'll talk about 3 areas of research that I discovered based on the field exploration and then worked on after I got back. The first one was retraction of these robots, that is reversing their growth. The second one was applying forces to the environment. And the third was using the entire body of the robot to sense the environment and the robot's own shape. Then I'll conclude with a summary of the contributions of this work. So I'll start with the introduction, and I'll mention that some of this information and a lot more about the state of the art of vine robots is published in a paper in the Frontiers in Robotics and AI journal from last year called Design, Modeling, Control, and Application of Everting Vine Robots. There are many spaces that are too small or dangerous for humans to enter where we would like to see and manipulate the environment. Inspecting a water pipeline, searching a collapsed building, conducting minimally invasive surgery, or doing underwater archaeology are just some examples of these types of spaces where a robot could really help us get into these spaces and do tasks. However, there are a lot of challenges with existing robot design that make them unsuitable for these types of tasks. As one example, they need to be able to fit through small spaces while also being able to navigate over and around obstacles. And that combination is challenging. Also, in many of these situations, such as surgery and disaster response, the human-robot system needs to react to unknown and changing conditions and make decisions in a way that is not possible with the current state of artificial intelligence. So it's important for these systems to allow intuitive human-in-the-loop control of the robot. Now, many of today's robots are, such as the ones found on a factory floor, are rigid and very strong and able to do repeatable movements, but they're not able to do these types of tasks very well. So if you look to nature, you'll see that a lot of systems in nature, like the bodies of squirrels and bees and octopuses and vines, are not made of entirely rigid components, but in fact, they might be made of a combination of rigid and soft components, or they might even be entirely soft. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be telling you about how this new robot design paradigm of plant-like tip growth transforms robot capabilities for exploration of unknown environments. The idea behind vine robots is that we want to have a robot that grows like a vine from a fixed base to a target. Vine robots have three main attributes. The first is tip extension. The second one is directional control, so we can steer them as they're growing. And the third is significant length change. Now, movement in this way has two main benefits over other types of movement. The first is that these types of robots can navigate confined spaces with ease because they don't need to slide relative to their environment to propel their tip forward. Second, their body creates a structure from their base to their tip, which can be used to transmit payloads or to transmit forces from the tip back to their base. There are many different types of vine robots that have been explored in recent years. One mechanism is to extend telescoping segments. Another one has 3D prints itself to create a growing robot. Another one extends a chain of rigid links from the base to the tip. Another design has a reel at the tip that unreels material to create growth. And then there are a variety of systems that use inflated tubes to create this growth effect. And in particular, I want to talk about this mechanism called eversion, which is particularly elegant for creating growth. Everting vine robots are made of a tube of flexible material that is not stretchable. So imagine a plastic bag that's folded inside of itself. And then when internal air pressure is applied, it grows out from the tip. And this is similar to if you're trying to put on a sweater, but the sleeve of your sweater is stuck inside. As you put your arm through the sweater, you push out the sleeve and it grows along with your arm. It grows as your arm pushes it through. These types of robots can grow to enormously long lengths by storing their material on a spool in the base. Here's a video showing growth to 72 meters long. And the only reason it stopped growing was because it ran out of material. They can also be steered by shortening or lengthening one side or the other of the robot body. In addition, these robots have several benefits for exploration of confined spaces. First, they can navigate by using contact with the environment to allow them to steer as they run into obstacles. In addition, they can grow through apertures smaller than their body diameter, and they can use their continuum nature to support their own body weight and rise up over obstacles. So based on these proof of concept designs that had been developed in the lab, we wanted to take vine robots out into the field and see what they could do in the real world. This work is published in the IEEE Robotics and Automation magazine journal from last year as Vine Robots Design, Teleoperation, and Deployment for Navigation and Exploration. So our research question here was, how should we design and control a vine robot for exploration in the field? And we had this amazing opportunity to take our vine robot out into the field to explore archeological tunnels in an underground temple in Peru. There were these small spaces that were too small for a person to enter, and the archaeologists wanted to be able to take video and see what was inside there. So here's an overview of the system that we developed. It's a steerable vine robot with a camera at the tip that's able to grow to 10 meters long. And it's also able to be operated by a human operator using a flexible joystick. And this is an overview of the system. It has three main portions. First, the growing portion, which contains the camera mount and the soft robot body. Then the base station, which contains all of the pneumatic and electrical components required to control the soft robot body. And then the human interface, which allows the human operator to provide control commands to and receive visual information from the robot. One of the things that we needed to be able to do to use this robot in the field was to be able to steer it at lengths long enough for navigation. So we needed to develop a new actuator that could work at long lengths. This is the series pouch motor actuator, which is made by heat sealing a tube at regular intervals while leaving gaps for airflow, such that when the tube is inflated, each little pouch balloons up and shortens in length, causing the entire actuator to have a length change. And if you place 3 of these series pouch motors circumferentially around the robot body and along its entire length, you can have control over the robot tip position in 2 degrees of freedom, with the 3rd degree of freedom of tip position provided by growth. Here's a video showing what that looks like. So you can see that I'm commanding the robot to curve, and it's able to steer in any direction. Another thing we needed to do was to enable intuitive human-in-the-loop control of both growth and steering. So for growth, we developed a space that has a spool where the robot body is stored before it grows. And on one end of the spool, there's a bearing, and on the other end, there's a shaft coupler that connects the spool to a motor and an encoder, which are able to unreel to let out the robot body material as it gets pulled by the internal pressure. And here's a video showing how that works. The spool, by using this spool and the motor in combination with pressure, we can control pressure and robot length independently. In addition, we wanted to develop intuitive control over the steering. So we took the information measured by the joystick, which measures its own orientation using an inertial measurement unit at the tip. And that inertial measurement unit provides a quaternion, which we convert to a curvature and bending plane angle of the joystick using constant curvature assumptions. Then we calculate the joystick tip coordinates in its own reference frame, which we then map to the robot's own tip coordinates. And then we use a geometric model of the placement of the actuators, the series pouch motors, around the robot body to calculate what pressures we should send to each of the actuators to produce the desired robot curvature. Another thing we needed to do was to enable operator situational awareness so that the human operator would know where the robot was without having direct line of sight of the robot tip. So we placed a camera at the robot tip, which gets pushed along by a rigid cap as the robot grows. And this is similar to how a surfer gets pushed along by a wave, even though the wave is moving underneath the surfer. In order to have the camera work in the wireless denied environment of the tunnels, we needed to have the camera be wired. So to protect the camera wires from snagging on the environment, we developed a zipper pocket such that the zipper head gets pulled along by the rigid cap as the robot grows, and it zips up this pocket to contain the wires. And the wires are fed in from the base of the pocket. So now that we had this system, we were able to take it outside and see how it did in the field. So we explored 3 locations at this archaeological site that were chosen based on their expected relatively short length and difficulty to view through other means. The first location was a tunnel that curved slightly to the right and had a rock blockage that the robot was successfully able to navigate and take video throughout much of the tunnel. Next, the next tunnel was it had a 90-degree right turn, which would have been difficult to navigate with just a camera on a stick. And the VinerBot successfully navigated the turn and took video throughout the tunnel. Finally, the VinerBot navigated a vertical shaft, which would have been really difficult for a remote controlled car, for example, and it successfully made it to the end of the tunnel. So in summary of this, our design and control method was successful for exploration in the field, and this was really exciting because it showed that we could use these vine robots for exploration tasks in the real world. So, and the key takeaway here was that the intuitive human-in-the-loop control was made easier by exploiting the desirable behaviors of the robot body. Now, this field exploration was also really great for identifying areas for really important continued work that would make these robots even more useful in the field. So one area was retraction without buckling. So getting these robots to be able to ungrow without losing control over their motion and force. Another one was allowing excavation or environment sampling. So if you wanted to not just look at the environment, but you wanted to apply forces to move obstacles in the environment or to take samples of the environment, that was something that the archaeologists were really interested in. And third, we wanted to enable improved situational awareness for the human operator, because just viewing the camera tip image was actually not super intuitive for understanding where the robot had gone, and creating developing some other way to create a map of the robot shape and where it had traveled would be really helpful. So I'm first going to talk about solving that first challenge, retraction. And this work was published in the IEEE Robotics and Automation Letters journal last year, titled Retraction of Soft Growing Robots Without Buckling. So our research question here was, why does undesired buckling occur during vine robot retraction, and how can we prevent it? So what I mean by undesired buckling is that when you pull on the inner material from the robot base, instead of inverting back on itself, the robot body tends to buckle into this uncontrollable shape. And this can be disastrous if you're trying to have precise control over the motion of the robot and its force applied to the environment. So we started by developing a model to understand what's going on here and why buckling sometimes occurs and why inversion sometimes occurs. So first, a little bit of terminology. Here's a side view of the vine robot. The tip is the distal end, and then we call the wall the part of the robot body that doesn't move away from or toward the base. And then we call the inner part the tail, and that does move away from or toward the base as the robot grows. In order to get the robot body to invert, you need to apply a certain amount of tail tension, TT, on the tail. However, if our model assumes that either inversion or buckling will occur depending on which one requires the lower tail tension. And something else we noticed was that straight robots tend to buckle in the middle, similar to axial buckling of inflated beams, whereas curved robots tend to buckle at their base, similar to transverse buckling of inflated beams. And so, since buckling occurs differently in straight and curved robots, we model them differently. And there are actually existing equations for modeling these types of robots that we were able to make use of to develop our model. So we experimentally validated our model by first retracting a straight robot at various pressures and lengths and noting whether it successfully inverted or whether it buckled. Inversion is denoted by the green circles and buckling is denoted by the red X's. And then we plotted our modeled length at which we expected the transition from inversion to buckling to occur for each pressure. And it turns out that the model actually fits the data pretty well. Then we did the same thing for robots of small curvature, medium curvature, and large curvature, and plotted our model along with the data there. And there's quite good agreement, which shows that we have a good understanding of what's going on here. So a few takeaways from this model are that even straight robots buckle. So you can't just make sure that the robot is straight and then expect it to never buckle. Also, even high pressure robots buckle. So ramping up the internal pressure is not a solution to this buckling problem. Finally, the key insight here was that zero length robots do not buckle. So if we could somehow make sure that the robot length is always very short, then we would be able to prevent this buckling issue. So this is the inspiration for our retraction device that we developed. And the idea was that we wanted to make the effective robot length 0 for the purpose of retraction. So what we were doing before was that we needed to apply this tail tension to cause inversion, but we were applying it using a device, a motor at the base, which applies a device force FD and an equal and opposite grounding force FG on its environment. However, this means that the entire robot length is susceptible to buckling due to this force. Our insight here was that we wanted to apply the force on the tail while being grounded to the robot tip. So we moved our device to the robot tip where it applies its device force FD and its equal and opposite grounding force FG, but this time at the robot tip. And this makes the effective length for the purpose of retraction 0. Here's how we implemented this device. We had a pair of motors that are surrounded by a pair of hollow rollers that grip the tail. And we had a pair of routing apertures, one towards the tip and one towards the base, which were designed to be low friction, and also a tip grounding ring, also designed to be low friction. And this is what the device looks like in action. So on the left, you see the video I showed before where buckling occurs. And then on the right, you see that when we're pulling from the robot tip using this device, successful inversion occurs. Now that we have this new capability to retract without buckling, we wanted to show what we could do with it. So one of the things you can do now, as shown in the bottom video, is that you can actually explore a forking path. If you go down one fork, then you can retract, and then you can steer as you go down another fork. Another thing you can do is that you can navigate a delicate environment without applying undesired forces. So in the top video, there's no retraction device, and the robot is actually successfully able to retract through this without buckling, but it does end up applying a high force to the environment. And then in the bottom video, you see that with the retraction device, the force applied to the environment is much reduced. And then finally, another thing we're able to do is to collect samples of the environment by growing over the environment with tape stuck to the bottom of the robot body and then retracting back in. And the tape sticks to the soil and the environment, and then the soil gets packaged inside the robot tail, allowing it to return to the base in reverse order of where it was found while leaving the environment undisturbed. So in summary of this section, we learned that undesired buckling occurs when the force to buckle is less than the force to invert the robot, and that retraction from the robot tip prevents undesired buckling. So a key insight here was that with thoughtful design of the internal force location, we were able to restore control over the robot's movement and its external force application. So now that we have this device at the tip, we wanted to take advantage of it to apply forces to the environment. So this is work published in the IEEE Robotics and Automation, in the IEEE RSJ International Conference on Intelligent Robots and Systems last year, under the title, A Tip Mount for Transporting Sensors and Tools Using Soft Growing Robots. Our research question here was, how can we use a vine robot's high strength and tension to apply forces to the environment? And this is an interesting idea because something that's true of all engineering materials that I know of is that they tend to be, their buckling strength in compression increases with length, but their strength in tension remains constant with length. And this is particularly important for vine robots because they can grow so long, and we want them to be able to apply high forces even when they're very long. So we wanted to mount something to the robot tip that allows us to apply forces there. But there are several challenges of mounting to the robot tip. One of them is that the material that's at the tip is constantly changing. So you can't just stick something there and expect it to stay there. Another challenge is that the tail of the robot moves at twice the speed as the robot tip. So if you were to place a camera with a string that goes inside the tail, the camera would get ejected as the robot grows, and it would get engulfed as the robot retracts. And then a third challenge is that with the rigid cap design that I had presented earlier, while it stays on the robot tip during growth, it actually falls off during retraction. So there have been several previous tip mount designs that have been developed for vine robots. And each of them have their own benefits and drawbacks. Some of them can remain at the robot tip during growth. Some remain at the robot tip during retraction. Some can transmit pulling forces to the environment. Some can function at arbitrary robot lengths. And then none of them so far allow retraction without buckling. We wanted to create a tip mount design that has all of these 5 capabilities. So here's the design we developed. You can see that it does successfully remain at the robot tip during both growth and retraction without buckling, and that it can remain at the tip during steering, and it doesn't interfere with the operation of the series pouch motors. So here's our design. It has 3 main components. First, the outer cap, then the retraction device, and then the rolling interlock, which interlocks the outer cap over the retraction device. So the outer cap, the rolling interlock has bearings here that allow the robot body material to pass through in a low friction manner, while making sure that the outer cap will not fall off during retraction or during environment force application. So we were successfully able to show that we could pull on the environment using this tip mount design. And we wanted to understand what factors affected the weight limit that we could pull with this device. So the factor that actually ended up limiting the force that we could lift was the rollers in the retraction device slipping on the tail. And those limited the force capability to 2.5 kilograms. Now, if we could improve that interface between the rollers and the tail, we could improve the weight limit. And the next factor that we would come up against is the motor torque limit, so which would limit the strength to 3.3 kilograms. And if we could improve that through different actuation or stronger motors, then the next limit would be the tip mount device itself falling apart, which happened at 7 kilograms. And if we could improve that by reinforcing the design, then what's really exciting is that the material of the robot body itself could support up to 25 kilograms for this particular thickness. And so by making improvements to our design, we could actually apply an order of magnitude more force than we're currently able to, which ends up being quite a lot of force for a soft robot to be able to apply. And now that we have this tip mount design, we demonstrated that we can, for the first time, retrieve and deliver objects. So here the robot goes to the water bottle, retrieves it, and then delivers it to the trapped victim. In summary of this section, with thoughtful end effector design, we were able to transmit high tensile forces from the environment to the robot body while still allowing growth and retraction. And a key insight here was that by harnessing different properties of the robot body in different directions, we were able to achieve both adaptability and strength. So the robot body was still maintained its flexibility and bending, but it was strong in tension. And this gets at one of the grand challenges in robot design, which is doing this combination of adaptability and strength, because soft robots tend to be adaptable and rigid robots tend to be strong, but achieving the combination is challenging. So, so far, we had looked at placing sensors at the robot tip, like cameras, but next we wanted to look at how we could apply, how we could place sensors along the entire robot body and use that to map the robot shape. So this work is presented in the IEEE International Conference on Soft Robotics this year, and under the title Distributed Sensor Networks Deployed Using Soft Growing Robots. So our research question here was, how can we sense the environment and the robot's own shape? So we first developed this distributed sensing architecture that consists of these sensor bands that are wrapped circumferentially around the robot body at regular intervals. And they each have their own microcontroller embedded in the band, and then they communicate with an aggregator microcontroller at the base using this I2C communication wire or bus. So here's a close-up of each of the bands. It contains these connectors and then its own microcontroller, and then an inertial measurement unit, which is used to measure the orientation of each band, which is then used to map the shape of the robot. And then we also placed a temperature and humidity sensor, as well as 4 thermistors that can sense all the way around the circumference of the robot. And then something that we needed to consider was that with this flexible printed circuit board technology, while it is quite flexible, it is not flexible enough to undergo all of the bending and wrinkling that the fine robot body undergoes when it grows and when it interacts with the environment. So we needed to develop a circuit laminate to prevent excess curvature. So we developed this blue laminate made out of urethane, which has this jamming teeth pattern, such that when the flexible circuit bends to too tight of a radius of curvature, the teeth jam, preventing it from bending any farther, but it also still allows the whole assembly to be flexible up until that point. So you can see here that the laminate successfully protects the circuit while still allowing growth of the robot. And here's a demonstration of directional sensing of temperature and humidity using this sensor network. So we're growing the robot in between a set of 3 pipes that are leaking steam, and then we're able to locate the leak. So you'll see the data in a second. Showing on the top, we see the data from the 4 thermistors in each band, and also along the length. And you'll see that here we read the highest thermistor value, showing that that's the location of the leak around the circumference of the robot body and along its length. And the humidity data also confirms that. In addition, we did shape sensing with vine robots using the inertial measurement unit orientations measured at each band, combined with our knowledge of their 3-inch spacing along the robot. So to reconstruct the robot shape, we only know the orientation of the robot at these discrete points where the band is, where the sensor bands are. So here's sensor band 1, and here's sensor band 2, and we don't actually know what's going on with the robot shape in between those 2 sensor bands. And if you look at the picture on the right, we notice that most of the time when the robot is inflated, it tends to bend at a discrete location and to form a bend that has a straight segment on both sides and then an approximately circular arc. So we assume that that's how the robot bends in between these sensor locations. However, we still don't know precisely where between the 2 sensors the bend is located. So that introduces uncertainty into our shape prediction, which we quantified later. And here's a demonstration of our real-time shape reconstruction. So you can see the robot growing with the sensor bands on it. And right now, these are tucked inside the robot, but as they evert, you'll see that the calculated shape actually does match the true robot shape. We quantified the accuracy of this by going through a maze where we estimated the shape using the inertial measurement units and plotted that in blue. And then we measured the ground truth shape from the overhead video and plotted that in red. And you'll see that as the robot grows through this maze, the shape matches pretty well. And actually at the tip of the robot, there's only 9 centimeters of error over 107 centimeter total robot length. And this accuracy could be improved further by placing the sensor bands closer together or adding additional redundant sensors. And we showed that this also works in 3D. So we were able to grow the robot body through a pipe and map out the shape. One second. We wanted to explore other shape sensing technologies as well that could potentially give us even more accuracy. So we explored fiber optic shape sensing, which has been shown in the literature to have shape sensing accuracy of 1 to 2% of the length. And the way this works is that it measures, we have these fibers, optical fibers, sorry, there we go, that measure the strain along their length at millimeter scale resolution. And they use this interrogator, which sends light through the fiber, and based on how it reflects back, the strain measurements can be done. And then we place 3 fibers in a triangle shape, and then using that strain information, you can calculate the shape of this whole fiber bundle. So we fabricated a sensor using this method by constraining the fibers into a triangle shape using threads tied at regular intervals, and then placing epoxy along the fiber bundle, and then moving the threads and epoxying where the threads were. We also needed to develop a protective tubing similar to what we did for the flexible printed circuit boards, because these sensors will break if they're bent to too high curvature. So here we just used a tube that surrounds the sensor along its entire length and is taped along the outside of the robot body. Here's a demonstration of the shape sensing capability using the fiber bundle before putting it on the robot body. So you can see that I think there's a slight delay between the 2 videos, but you can see that the shape matches the real shape pretty well qualitatively. And we didn't actually quantify the shape match yet, but that will be part of our future work. We also placed this sensor on the Vine robot body and showed that with the sensor armor that we developed, the sensor can successfully endure the growth of the robot and then the bending required to navigate a maze. And the shape matches decently well, although there are errors here that we want to quantify and understand how to improve. So in summary of this section, by protecting sensors from excess curvatures, we were able to adapt flexible circuit technology and fiber optic sensing technology to place sensors on the robot body. And with the first method, we were able to combine models of how the robot bends with sparse sensors to allow pretty high accuracy shape sensing. And with the second technique, we should theoretically be able to get even more high accuracy because we don't need models. We don't need to rely on models of how the robot bends. But that second system does come at a much higher price. So moving on to the conclusion, a summary of the contributions of this thesis is: first, we developed a successful Vine robot design and human-in-the-loop control strategy for field exploration. And a key takeaway here was that our human-in-the-loop control method was able to exploit the desirable properties of the robot body to make it successful in the field. Second, we discovered why undesired buckling occurs during retraction, and we designed a device to prevent it. And the insight here was that the careful location of internal force application restored our control over the robot's movement and external force application. Then we used the high strength of Vine robots in tension to apply forces to the environment while still maintaining their flexibility. And an insight here was that we were able to take advantage of different properties of the robot body in different directions to achieve this challenge of both adaptability and strength. And then finally, we adapted flexible circuits and optical fibers for distributed sensing of the environment and the robot's own shape. And with the flexible circuits, we made use of models of how the robot body bends to allow us to use a relatively sparse sensor spacing and still get reasonable accuracy. So you'll notice this was, we first deployed the robot in the field, and then based on insights from our field deployment, we were able to focus on the most high impact areas of research when we came back into the lab. So this thesis has been about how new designs, models, and control schemes enable key performance improvements that make Vine robots useful for exploration in the field. And thinking back to those spaces too small or dangerous for humans to enter that I mentioned earlier, I'm really excited about how much work has been done over the past several years that is really bringing us close to being able to do the types of tasks we'd like to do in these environments. And I am excited about how continued research on Vine robots will make them even more useful for improving human health, safety, and productivity. Oh no. Oh, wait, sorry, I needed to do the acknowledgements. Okay, one second. Let me find my other version.
In the meantime, while Margaret pulls up her acknowledgement slides, everyone can start thinking about questions. What we do at these thesis defenses, for any of you who are new to this, is that we'll have questions from the audience when Margaret's done with her acknowledgements. And then after that, we do a closed session with the committee for questions just between us and Margaret. So anyone is welcome to ask a question after Margaret's acknowledgements.
Okay, I think we're back.
Great, go ahead.
Okay, so I'd like to take some time to thank the many people who have made this PhD possible for me. First of all, I want to thank God. Thank you, God, for creating me and loving me and providing for me every step of my life and every step of the PhD. I can do nothing without you, and all that I do is for your glory. Next, I'd like to thank the funding sources that made this PhD research possible, whether through grants or fellowships. I especially appreciate the fellowship that I got from Stanford Engineering that made it possible for me to come to Stanford in the beginning, and the fellowship that I got from the ARCS Foundation for my last 2 years of the PhD, which allowed me to stay for an extra year as a grad student and set myself up well for next career steps. I need to thank Allison. Thank you so much for being the best advisor I could have asked for. Your presence has truly been a gift. I remember the first summer that I was working in the lab, and I thought it was so cool that you stayed in the lab with me until midnight, the night before we were submitting our ICRA paper. It was my first conference paper. And I thought it was so cool that, different from classwork where you just turn in a paper to your professor, with research, the professor really works side by side with you. And it's been really great to have you on my team for the last 6 years. You've been my tireless advocate, supporter, teacher, and mentor, introducing me to colleagues, helping me navigate academia, comforting me, celebrating with me, and also encouraging me to live a balanced life. So as you mentioned in the picture on the right, we skipped out on part of that conference in Hawaii to go snorkeling, which was super fun. I'm sad to be leaving the lab, but I look forward to continuing to learn from you as I go forward in my career. I also want to thank the rest of my committee for making this defense possible. So first, thank you to Karen for being the chair, and thank you for your example. It's always great to know another successful woman in robotics. Mark, thank you so much for your wisdom and cleverness about robot design. I'm so grateful that I got to work with you this year on the Vine Robot Sensing project, and I always learn so much from you. Osama, thank you for your enthusiasm and encouragement in robotics. You were the first person who got me excited about teleoperating robots to go where people can't go based on your work with Ocean One. And Elliot, thank you for kicking off all the Vine Robot research in our lab. And thank you for sharing your new students with me and giving me a peek into the life of a successful assistant professor. Paul, thank you for taking me under your wing in so many different ways, teaching, exploring industry research, learning the faith, becoming a professor, and so much more. I remember when I was deciding whether to take your class my first year, and an older student said, definitely take it because knowing Paul is great, and he was so right. You have a unique gift for encouraging and sharing academic inquiry, and you bring this into every facet of your life. I remember this year at Mass during Easter week, you asked me and several other people what we thought about these interesting philosophical questions that your son John Paul was asking about the faith. And I want to bring your excitement about learning into the classroom, and whenever I'm stuck presenting something, I'll be thinking, how would Paul teach this? I want to thank the many co-authors and collaborators and lab mates who worked with me on this research and surrounded me as I was working on it. This PhD was definitely not a solitary endeavor. You helped me develop research ideas and get things done, and you made my work so much more fun. And I want to give a special thank you to Laura for being my big sister on the Vine Robot project and taking a huge role in shaping my research. I want to thank the Catholic community at Stanford for being an immediate home for me as soon as I came here and encouraging me to grow in my faith. I'm especially grateful for the choir, where I got to play the piano and sing every week, and also my small group, where I've made some of my best friends at Stanford. Thank you to the Stanford Women's Ultimate Frisbee team for providing another home for me over the past 6 years. I came to Stanford not knowing how to play Ultimate Frisbee, and I really appreciate your willingness to teach me and welcome me into the community. It's been so much fun to play games, make music videos, travel across the country, work out on Zoom, and play Ultimate with you. Thank you to my family for being a constant source of support and encouragement and reminding me not to take my work too seriously. Thank you, Dad, for encouraging me from a young age to always keep asking questions. Thank you, Mom, for homeschooling me through 8th grade and teaching me to be self-motivated and excellent in all that I do and making so many sacrifices for my education. And thank you to the rest of my family for providing a really fun place to visit during breaks from school. I want to thank all the many other friends, teachers, colleagues at Stanford and throughout my life who've made my life better and helped me make it to this point. I wouldn't be here without you. And thank you to everyone who is attending right now. I really appreciate your support and your interest. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Margaret. So you can put your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand, or you can unmute. Margaret, you can also call on people, but maybe I'll just help by managing a bit, since Margaret, I know it's tough for you to see what's in the chat.
Yeah.
So the first question came from the chat from Bob L. Bob says, could you explain a bit about how the up, down, left, right actuation works in navigating 3D environments? It is pneumatic, right? But I'm not sure how the force is applied.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me go to that slide. So yeah, here's the video of it happening. And yes, so the series pouch motor actuators are attached along the entire length of the robot And for each one, when you inflate it, it shortens along its entire length. And that causes the robot to curve in that direction. It's kind of similar to how your finger works, where you've got this backbone, and then you have the tendon on one side of your finger, where if you shorten that tendon, that causes your finger to bend in that direction.
Thanks. And Andrew Bylard has his hand up.
Hi, Margaret. Really cool robot design. I was wondering what you think about the future of sort of letting this type of robot crawl free, like attaching the tip to some object and then actually pulling the retraction and extension mechanism forward. Since it can already, pull a lot of force, what do you think about the possibility of that, and maybe miniaturizing the mechanism so that it can also squeeze through tight spaces?
Yeah, so just to make sure I understand what you're asking, are you saying that, like, what if you could anchor the tip mount to something and then move the base by pulling on it?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought too much about it. But yeah, I guess you could have some kind of like inchworming type motions, and maybe you could eliminate some of the difficulties with having the robot grow really long, where you can't apply very strong forces in compression. Maybe you could, like pull along the base and then keep the robot relatively short to maybe brace against the environment and climb something. But I feel like with the Vine robot, the big advantage of it is that the body doesn't move relative to its environment as the tip grows. So you might be losing some of that.
Great. Other questions? There's one in the chat from Alexandria that says, to what extent can the present cap machinery squeeze through spaces?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let me go to the slide on that one. That is a challenge with this design that I presented, is that because it is larger than the body diameter, and because it's rigid, you are limited in the spaces that you can grow through. So you can't actually take advantage of all of the benefits of this type of movement. And also the cap drags along the environment as you grow, which is not great either. And so we've actually developed some new designs that solve that issue, and they place the outer cap, instead of outside the robot body, they place it inside the tail here, and they still interlock it with this retraction device or a ring inside the robot body. And that actually would work much better in that type of situation where you need to go through a narrow gap.
Great. Kitty Helmick has the hand up.
Hi, Margaret. I was wondering if you experimented at all with combining the cap with the sensors, and if it's possible to put the two together.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, like, how would you combine all these things into one robot where you have a tip mount and you have the sensors on it? And we have not integrated the two yet, but I think you could. Especially, it might actually be easier with the second version that I showed, where you have the sensors on a tube that goes along the entire robot length, because then you could still use a tip mount like this and just have like a groove where the tube can go through, the sensor protective tube could go through. So I think that would definitely be possible.
Great. And Karen Dowling asks in the chat, says, I'm curious if a snake version exists without an anchored source that allows continuous wrapping. What would need to be done to make that happen?
A snake version without wait, sorry, can you say
Without
that
an
again?
anchored source.
Okay.
So I'm imagining like a water wiggly.
Yeah, no, I think maybe what you're getting at is, one of the challenges, I didn't really talk about it too much, but one of the challenges with Vine robots is that as they wrap around like a helical path, for example, the friction between the tail material inside and the wall builds up, so that after wrapping through a certain angle, you won't be able to grow anymore before you would burst the robot body. And so one of the solutions to that is to place the stored robot body material instead of at the base, all on a reel at the robot tip, like wrapped inside this retraction device, for example. And that allows you to grow without worrying about how much curvature you're going through.
Great. And Andy Lewis asked in the chat, are there any new field explorations that you're excited to do with your cool new capabilities?
Yeah, good question. There's one that we started doing that we didn't end up finishing, but it was exploring these underground salamander habitats on the Stanford campus. And I think that's a really compelling and fun application where there are these underground burrows where the salamanders live. The burrows are constructed by squirrels, and they range from like 1 inch to 4 inches in diameter. And this endangered California tiger salamander lives in there. And the biologists are interested in understanding what the salamanders are doing in there, which burrows they're in, what are the temperature and humidity conditions in there. Like mapping the burrow would be really helpful. And I think a lot of the technologies that we've been developing are pointing towards use in that type of application. So that would be really cool.
Great. And Zenish has his hand up.
Hi, Margaret. Amazing work, very inspirational. I was wondering if you have thought about reverse mechanism for the robot.
Reverse mechanism. Wait, could you elaborate a little bit more?
Like the compression, like the shrinking mechanism.
Oh yeah, like allowing it to retract.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that was what I presented on, was solving that, allowing it to retract. We solved that by adding this tip device, which pulls from the tip instead of the base.
Great. And then one of the originals, Laura Blumenschein, has her hand up.
Hey, Margaret, great presentation. Good to see all of it kind of brought together. I had a thought while you were presenting on the pulling with the tip mount device again. I was wondering if you could comment on how you think internal pressure affects that maximum force that you're able to pull with when you're considering, you know, the material limits and all of these other limits that you have with the device.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're asking about this slide where we considered all these limits, and then you're saying how does the internal pressure affect that? Yeah, that's a good question, because when you're retracting and pulling while retracting, you do need to counteract the pressure, the internal pressure times the cross-sectional area of the robot tip. And so if you were to decrease the internal pressure, then you would probably be able to apply a higher force here. But you wouldn't want to decrease it. Well, you need to have some tension in the outside of the robot body for that to work. And then if you wanted to increase the pressure, you'd have to counteract that, and your weight limit would be lower.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Margaret. So in order to wrap this up, I'm just going to feed you the last 2 questions from the chat together at once. So one person, Antiku, asked, is it possible to scale everything up and down, like to make a smaller robot that does the same thing on a smaller scale? And Nicholas Naclario asked, what aspects of this research are you most excited about to explore next? So scaling and what's next are the last questions.
Okay, yeah, great questions. So as far as scaling, most of the Vine robots have been tested at this similar scale, so like ranging in between 1 to 4 inches in diameter. But I think it would be really interesting to explore making them like the size of a room, or making them really, really tiny. But there are different things that come into play in both those situations. So when you make them very small in diameter, it takes higher pressure to get them to evert. Because you have a smaller cross-sectional area that you're pushing against. And then when you make them very large, they will burst at a lower pressure. And so there are challenges there, but I think at least small variations around these sizes are definitely possible. And then as far as what I'm excited about doing next, I think some of the areas that would be really cool to do with finer bots are, one, making them able to actually move in three degrees of freedom in 3 dimensions really well. So right now you'll see that they can only go mostly along the ground, and especially if they're carrying a tip mount device, they can't really grow straight upwards very easily. But I think it would be really cool to make it so that finer bots can really move in any direction, because then you could imagine creating whole structures that are kind of like self-knitted fabrics or something, which would be really interesting. And then, yeah, another important application or area of research is applying forces on the environment in different ways and studying how we can make true manipulators out of these finer bots, or how we could use their body to grow underneath things and maybe lift objects in that way. And then another area that I'm really interested in is now that we have this capability of adding sensors on the finer body, how do we take advantage of that to improve the robot control and to enable some things like shared autonomy or autonomy of these robots, or to improve the teleoperation mappings.
Great, thanks, Margaret. So let's all give Margaret a round of applause. So a couple of administrative notes. Margaret, you might want to save the chat before you close this Zoom meeting, because there's a lot of really nice well wishes for you that you probably didn't see file by as you were talking. So I encourage you to do that. And then for the committee, we are going to reconvene with Margaret in the separate Zoom room that she set up for that purpose. Email me if you have lost that link. And why don't we meet there in 2 minutes just to take a little breather or a bio break. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This is definitely the most people I've ever seen at a thesis defense. And great job, Margaret.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Margaret. Good job. Good job, Margaret.
Good work,
Thanks, Lynn.
Sprout.
Way to go.
Way to go.